I'd like to welcome Tessa Clarke. Hi,
Hi.
Tessa.
Hello.
This is Tessa Clarke, co-founder of OLIO. Firstly, I'd like to dive in and actually for the audience who a lot may not know what OLIO is, but could you tell us a little bit about the app and what actually OLIO is itself, please?
I certainly can. So hello, everybody. OLIO is the world's first neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing app. So we exist to tackle the enormous problem of perfectly good food being thrown in the bin by households across the UK. You might or might not know, but together, British households throw away £14 billion, sterling that is, of perfectly good food every year. And we aim to solve that problem by connecting you with your neighbour so you can give away rather than throw away your spare food. You just snap a photo and add it to the app. Neighbours living nearby get an alert. They can then browse for the listings, request what they want, and pop round and pick it up. And today we've got just over 2.7 million people have joined OLIO, and they have given away over 12 million portions of food.
I've been using it myself a little bit, actually, myself. I started a while ago now, and it's how I come across your app, and I thought it'd be a great fit for this launch event. And yeah, it's brilliant. It's, you know, I've seen it's obviously getting bigger and better. Before we go on to sort of specifically how you started OLIO, it'd be really interesting to find out about your background and your career and history, and just how you come into the industry before starting OLIO.
Yeah, certainly. So I am definitely not someone who grew up thinking that they were going to be an entrepreneur. I had no idea really about sort of entrepreneurship or business at all. So my parents are farmers in the middle of nowhere, pretty much in North Yorkshire. I then went to university, had no clue what I wanted to do after that. And so, like many people who don't know what they want to do, I became a strategy consultant. I did that for 3 years and realized that actually I wanted to do some more doing rather than just advising. And so I then embarked upon a period of probably about 10 or 15 years where I was working in industry, in media, retail, and also financial services, always in a digital capacity and also in general management. So, yeah, kind of heading up digital business units within those industries.
So could it be interesting to find out actually how the idea or where the idea came from to start OLIO?
Yeah, so the Lightbulb moment, I guess, if you like, for OLIO came about 6 years ago now. I was living with my family in Switzerland for work and moving back to the UK. And on moving day, the removal men said to me that we needed to throw away all of our uneaten food. And obviously, being the farmer's daughter that I am, with a pathological hatred for food waste, I was not prepared to do that. So much to the irritation of the packing men, I stopped packing and instead bundled up at the time my newborn baby and toddler and set out onto the streets clutching this food, hoping to find someone to give it to. And to cut a long story short, I failed miserably, but I wasn't to be defeated. I went back to my apartment, and when the packing men weren't looking, I smuggled the non-perishable food into the bottom of my boxes. And that was the moment I just thought, this is crazy, the lengths I'm going to avoid throwing away this food. I'm probably performing a criminal offense right now, but to me, it seemed equally criminal to put perfectly good food in the bin when I knew there was someone, probably within 100 meters of me who would like it. The problem was they just didn't know about it. And because I'd worked in digital for 10 or 15 years at that time, and I knew there was an app for everything, I couldn't believe that there wasn't a simple app where I could advertise my food and give it away to a neighbor.
So yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, a great start. So I believe you started with so you have a co-founder as well?
Yes. So my co-founder is Saasha, very, very good friend of mine. We met at business school over 15 years ago now. We studied together in California. And I told a couple of people about this idea of an app where you could give away your food to your neighbors, and pretty much everyone thought I was crazy and needed to get off maternity leave and go back to work. But Saasha immediately got it. And together we researched the problem of food waste, and what we discovered blew our brains. We could not believe that everybody wasn't yelling from the rooftops about this enormous problem, both in terms of the amount of waste that is generated. So a third of all food that we produce each year is thrown away. It's worth over $1 trillion. Alongside that, we have 800 million people who go to bed hungry every night, who could be fed on a quarter of the food that we waste in the Western world. And then the environmental impact of food waste is devastating if it were to be a country with the third largest source of greenhouse gas emissions after the USA and China. And so once Saasha and I had been through that desk research period, and then when we discovered that half of all food waste in a country like the UK takes place in the home, we knew that we had to bring the OLIO app to life to try and solve that problem.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So it'd be quite interesting to find out, obviously you've heard about sort of, I guess, the inception of how the idea of it, but how did you go about it, expanding beyond that point and I guess starting to scale up, and what were your routes into starting to, I guess, to find investment or get it off the ground?
Yeah. So we went through a pretty interesting process actually to go from an idea to a product in the market and scaling. So the first thing we did was that market research, which I've just outlined. So that was a big tick in the box for, is this a big problem beyond my personal experience? So that was a big yes. The next thing, though, that we needed to know was, is this a problem that anyone cares about? And so we did a market research survey. We seeded it all over local Facebook groups. And the key piece of insight that we got back from that was that 1 in 3 people said that they were physically pained throwing away good food. And we used deliberately extreme language, sort of physically pained, to try and weed out from, I guess, kind of, false positives of people saying, oh yeah, food waste is bad. So that was a big tick in the box. 1 in 3 people physically pained. That means this is actually a mainstream prevalent problem. Okay, so it's a problem on paper. It's a problem that people care about. But the next thing that we had to test, and the core bit of our hypothesis really, was that people would share food with a stranger / neighbor. And we wanted to test that hypothesis without sinking our life savings, building an app that, quite frankly, no one might want. And so what we did was we invited 12 people who had said that they were physically pained in that research survey and who all lived close to one another in North London. They didn't know each other. We didn't know them. And we asked them to take part in a 2-week experiment, and we put them on a WhatsApp group. And we said, here's a group of people. If you've got any spare food in this 2-week period, you can share it here via WhatsApp. And we waited with bated breath, I think, for over 24 hours before any sharing took place. And then it did start taking place, which was fantastic. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we met face to face with all of those people, which was kind of a slightly surreal experience. And they told us 3 things. They said, you absolutely have to build this. 2, it only needs to be slightly better than a WhatsApp group. And that was honestly one of the most powerful bits of feedback I think we've ever had. And then the 3rd thing was, how can I help? And that was really the genesis of our ambassador programs. We've now got over 50,000 people helping us all over the world, building off of the relationship that we built with those first 12 ambassadors. So it was after we'd done that proof of concept, I guess, if you like, using WhatsApp for free, that we then had the courage and conviction to invest our life savings in getting the app built. And so we did the whole process very quickly, though. We incorporated the company 9th of February, and exactly 5 months later to the day, we'd been through all this process and we had launched the first version in the App Store. And the reason why we were sort of on a mission to do things fast was because we had given ourselves a deadline of the end of that year. And if we hadn't sort of made a go of OLIO, then we would have to both go back and get proper jobs. And we knew that making a go of OLIO would mean that we would have to have raised funding. So, and we knew that to raise funding, we would need some data and some traction. So we were sort of flat out to get the app into the App Store for July, which meant that we did not spend long at all on logos and branding and stuff that at that stage isn't actually that important, or it wasn't for us. We just needed to kind of get the product out there and get people using it. And we did manage to close our first round of funding in October of that year, which then meant that we didn't have to go back and get proper jobs, and we still haven't. And we were able to bring the tech in-house because we got that first version of the app built, I should say, by an amazing agency called SimpleWeb in Bristol, who gave us reduced day rates in exchange for a small equity stake in the company when we did our first external fundraise.
That's interesting. So coming back to the funding, being female founders, did you find that a challenge at the time raising investment? Is there any issues with there?
In a word, yes. I've raised, so I lead on fundraising, and I definitely recommend that. By the way, fundraising is incredibly time consuming, so it's definitely something to kind of divide and conquer on. So for OLIO, I've led on our fundraising efforts. We've done it 4 times now. It is by a country mile the hardest thing that I've had to do, and some of that for sure is linked to the fact that we are a female founded business, and the data alone tells the story. So in the UK, approximately 1% of all venture capital funding goes to female founded businesses. 89% goes to male founded businesses, and the delta goes to mixed teams. So the odds that you're looking at are extremely challenging going into the fundraising experience. And I think we had the fact that we're female founders is a challenge. We were also tech for good, which isn't exactly the hottest space. We were pre-revenue for most of our raises, which also is a really pretty controversial way of raising, certainly here in the UK. It's not in the US. And we were also remote first. So we've never had an office. So yes, fundraising has always been challenging for us, but we've found ways around it, and we've found ways to overcome, in particular around the female founded bit, some of those biases that you face.
Do you feel that's changed at all in more recent times over the last, say, year or something?
I'd love to say yes, but the honest answer is no. The only change that I've seen is that a number of investment firms are recruiting more female staff, but they're generally at the analyst type position. They're still not yet at that partner level with check writing capabilities. And I believe very, very passionately that the lack of diversity amongst the gatekeepers of capital is an enormous challenge for our startup ecosystem, because it means that businesses that are founded by diverse founders, and I'm not just talking about gender, I'm talking about every sort of diversity lens, are not getting the capital that they need. And in my experience, it's the diverse founders that are solving the real problems facing humanity today. But what I found is that we were able to successfully raise when we were able to find a female investor with check writing abilities. And I kind of looked at my conversion rate. So my conversion rate pitching to a typical male investor might be 5% or 10%. But when I pitch to a female investor, my conversion rate is 75%.
Wow.
And most of our cap table is made up of women.
Okay.
But the problem is I can count the number of female investors pretty much on one or two hands. So that needs to change really very quickly.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. Just touching on your remote first, I guess that's been pretty interesting and positive for you. You haven't had to, I guess, adapt in the current climate of COVID and lockdowns. That you're already using that model. So
no, and I think that's an example, because we are diverse founders, we have just approached things differently. So we were 2 mums with young kids. We didn't live close to one another. And so to us, it seemed absolutely crazy to spend limited resources that we didn't have renting an expensive office that we didn't want. And so we built the organization to be remote first from the ground up. And through that process, we've discovered that we have access to an enormous talent pool that very few other people are tapping. We're not competing for the same, React Native developer in London along with all of the other unicorns. We can sort of spread our net much further. We've also found that we can access far more diverse talent. So both in terms of gender diversity and also neurodiversity and ethnicity and class. The minute you are widening, recruiting, say, across the whole country, you access that really, really diverse talent. And for us, diversity is really, really, really important. We're trying to build a product for 1 billion people. So we need a team that represents 1 billion people.
And of your ambassadors, is that quite a diverse audience within that as well? I mean, I'm wondering if you use them for actually testing or like beta testing apps or anything like that.
So our ambassador community is extremely diverse. In fact, we've kind of surveyed them, and they are representative of the UK as a whole, which is fantastic. And that's why that sort of growth model we found really effective. So just to explain what our ambassadors do, when you sign up to become an OLIO ambassador, you can either become a digital ambassador, which means you kind of spread the word about OLIO online, or you can become what we call a community hero, and we give you posters and letters and flyers and speaking notes for talking at local events, and templates for press releases, etc. And we've found that model of growth is really powerful because our ambassadors know their community far better than we ever would. So they can sort of translate and explain OLIO in a way that will resonate with their local community. And that's a much more scalable way of doing things than us trying to visit every town and city in the land.
No, that's a great idea, having those local champions. It seems, yeah, that's really good. I saw you, I'm not sure how long ago it was now, but I think it wasn't on when I first started using it, but you partnered, I know Tesco's has become a partner now, which is, I'm guessing you're probably hoping to partner with more of the supermarkets, but I was wondering if there's any more specific plans around that or with OLIO itself?
Yeah, so it's probably worth just sort of touching briefly on that partnership with Tesco. So the first thing for all the aspiring entrepreneurs out there, or actual, sort of entrepreneurs who are doing it, partnerships can be game changing. So our Tesco partnership has been game changing for us in terms of just the sheer volume of food coming onto the app. And how it works, by the way, is we have thousands of volunteers who are assigned to their local stores, and then they, on their allotted time and day, pop out their home across the road. They pick up all of the store's unsold food. They take it home. They add it to the app. Their neighbours request it. The neighbours pop around and pick it up. And it takes that food from being a waste stream in the store 1 to 2 hours earlier to instead being fully redistributed into the homes of the local community. So the sheer volume of food we've got coming onto the food as a result of onto the platform as a result of Tesco has been transformational, but it did take us over 3 years to pull off that partnership. So the learning there is that you should work on sort of partnerships in parallel to growing the business sort of directly yourself, because you can't possibly hope to change the sales cycles and the business cycles of large organizations. And it's better just to sort of crack on. And also, the more quickly you get to scale yourself, then the more credible you become as a prospective partner.
Yeah, I see. Have you any other projects outside of OLIO, especially in the sustainable area, or anything else?
Me, no, I do a lot of, I spend a couple of hours a week mentoring, which is a grand word, but doing calls with startup founders who reach out to me, who want to get my feedback and get some advice on their journey. So I do quite a lot of that. I have a non-exec role as well, which is helpful just to bring in a bit of extra cash. So I think we've all got to, especially in the early days, you've got to find your way of kind of balancing your family books. And so I needed to, in the very early days, I was having to do kind of consulting work and non-exec roles and OLIO, but then over time I've been able to drop the consulting stuff and I just sort of keep this non-exec role. But I'm extremely passionate about everything to do with sustainability and sustainable living, and have been taking my family really on a journey of figuring out what sustainable living looks like for us, just as regular kind of citizens, and our lives and how we lead it and how we consume.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something we're personally quite passionate about, and just trying to do as much as we can, starting at home and convincing a few friends and family as well in that small way, I guess, to sort of do what we can. So pretty much, I think we're almost close to, I guess, wrapping up really, but I just sort of wanted to finish on, is any golden nuggets you have, or any little inside tips for anyone starting out as an entrepreneur, a creator, or a founder?
Yeah, so I've got a couple. The first one I would say is make sure you've picked a real problem. And I would point anybody who's sort of not sure about what they want to do, but they know they want to do something entrepreneurial. There's a thing called the climate crisis going on. We literally need every man, woman, and child helping to solve that problem, and all the constituent parts of the problem, the ecological crisis and the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, and et cetera, et cetera. So, but pick a real problem. The second thing I would recommend everybody to do is to read 2 books. One is The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, which has just been an absolute Bible for us in terms of how we test, iterate, and learn and get product out there. And the second one is called the MOM test, MOM test, by a guy called Rob Fitzpatrick, which is a really short but very kind of challenging read in terms of how you should be doing market research when you're at concept stage, you're trying to get validation. Really, really very powerful little book. And then the third thing I would say is to try and find some way to test your core hypotheses for free. Too often, I think people want to jump to building this sort of the solution, the full solution with all the bells and whistles, and that could just be very, very costly, very time consuming, and it's a very high risk strategy. Much better is to take the lean startup approach and figure out how you can test those core hypotheses for free or as cheaply as quickly as possible.
That's good tips.
Yeah.
Very
and then
good.
the final thing, actually, sorry, I would say is to be constantly learning. So nobody starts out as a first-time entrepreneur knowing how to do it. But if you just become obsessed with learning, so listening to all the podcasts that are out there, reading all the books, if it's helpful, you can follow me on Medium. I wrote a blog post there with about 15 or 20 podcasts with a brief description of each and why I'd sort of recommend them for early stage founders. So do check that out.
Okay. Yeah. If you wouldn't mind sharing them, maybe with me, or I'll look them up myself, and we can share them with our audience as well.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Well, I think we're sort of pretty. I'm not sure if we actually haven't had a chance to check if we've got any questions. I'm not sure if we actually asked for questions in advance, but
I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, I'll just catch up just to see if there's if anything come in. So, how can the public help with the app, and how do you make money?
Two different questions, both excellent. So, how can the public help? You might be surprised to hear that our number one challenge is not getting people to go pick up free food. There's no shortage of people who want to get out of the house, pop across the road, meet a neighbour, and get some stuff for free. And that's reflected in the fact that half of all the food added to the app is requested within 24 minutes. And we also have a non-food section as well, where people are giving away toiletries, cosmetics, kitchen appliances, books, clothes, toys, stuff you don't want to sell, you don't want to ship halfway across the country. And half of all the non-food items are requested within 4 hours. So our number one challenge is encouraging people to kind of take that leap of faith and to share their spare. So you might be at home thinking, is anyone really going to want this head of broccoli or these 2 lemons or these 3 out-of-date tins of soup? The answer is a massive resounding yes. So the biggest thing you can do is to share your spare. That then sort of kickstarts this flywheel of sharing in your local community. Then in terms of how we make money, we've started generating revenues through charging the businesses for the service that we provide with our volunteers who collect and redistribute their unsold food. So we've mentioned Tesco, we have Pret a Manger, Compass Catering, Elior Catering, Selfridges, Virgin Trains, Planet Organic. So lots of businesses like that. And we continue to explore the potential for additional revenue streams.
Okay. I think there's one last question coming, actually. Is there a way to link to food bank, given the vast amount which must be come through supermarkets?
Yeah, so that's another important question. So just to explain the food waste problem, half of all food waste takes place in the home. 2% takes place at a retail store level at the supermarkets. 2%, that is it. Half is us, 2% is the supermarkets. And then the rest is kind of up the supply chain. So that's the first really, 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 really important point to absorb, which is that we're half the problem. The supermarkets are a tiny part of the problem. The reason why they're such a small part of the problem is there's only 10 or 15,000 supermarkets throwing away perhaps half a percentage point of their turnover, in comparison to 28 million households throwing away just under a quarter of the weekly shop. So, a quarter of 28 million households versus 0.5% of 10 or 15,000 supermarket stores. That's why we're half the problem and they're only 2%. The second point that is raised around food banks. So a number of food banks use OLIO when they have too much food. So they will often get flooded with too much of one particular thing that they can't shift on. So they'll use OLIO. Sometimes food banks will often tell their beneficiaries about OLIO So they can use OLIO as another source of food. And sometimes people who volunteer at food banks might sort of pick up stuff via OLIO and take it to the food bank. It's really, really, really important to stress, though, OLIO's mission is to solve the problem of food waste. We have a secondary benefit, which is that we are also helping to feed some people who are hungry. But the vast majority of people in the UK who are living in food poverty, 80% of them are not receiving help from a food bank. And many of those people are receiving help via OLIO. But the key thing is that they're doing it without any stigma. They're doing it sort of keeping their dignity intact. And that's what we hear is really, really important for our users. What they love about OLIO is that they don't have to go see their GP to access it. They don't need to chit. There's no quotas. They can just be just like anybody else. And so we work very hard to position OLIO as being about modern, sustainable, everyday living, where it's just common sense to give away your spare rather than to throw it away. And through focusing on our mission of reducing food waste, we have that really, really important secondary benefit of helping to feed a lot of people. But we're rooted in community and not charity.
Okay, thank you very much.
No worries.
Well, I think we will wrap up there. And
Okay.
yes, really appreciate your time, Tessa. Thank you for coming on.
No worries. I'm afraid I've got
Really
to go to put the kids to bed now. So I will love you and leave you, but I hope that was helpful.
No, definitely. And yeah, as I said, I wholeheartely recommend checking out OLIO app as well. So not obviously to yourself, but to our audience. So, yeah, thanks very much, Tessa.
I'll email you the link to the podcast.
That's great. We'll share that out. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.